The following program was funded in part by Toyota, AT&T, Baldwin Richardson Foods, Lincoln Financial Group, Apple, American Airlines. A complete list is available at thehistorymakers.org. From Queens, New York to the world stage, law has been his calling, and justice for all, his life's mission. His name is Eric Holder, and the History Makers, the nation's largest African-American video oral history archive, is proud to present An Evening with Eric Holder. And now to our host, TV journalist, Jonathan Capehart.
Good evening. His life has been a series of firsts. The first African-American U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. The first African-American Deputy Attorney General. The first African-American Attorney General of the United States. His life has been committed to excellence and social justice. Tonight, we are here to celebrate a life well lived. And here to help us is the amazing artistry of Mr. Raul Midón.
When I was a little boy, vivid dreams were my favorite toy. Sweet music set me free. I closed my eyes to see the invisible chains, invisible chains. But now I'm grown to be a man, gonna make my way with my own two hands. Wish that I could be absolutely free from these invisible chains, invisible chains. Where there's a will, there is a way. Where there's a will, there is a way. Oh, yeah. Where there's a will, there is a way. Oh, where there's a will, there is a way. Making my way toward my redemption. This prison is of my own invention, yeah. What will it take to capture my attention? Love will help part the sea. Don't see that's inside of me that holds these invisible chains, invisible chains. Where there's a will, there is a way to break these invisible chains. Where there's a will, there is a way. Where there's a will, there is a way to break these invisible chains. Where there's a will, there is a way to break these invisible chains.
Please welcome to the stage the Honorable Eric Holder. I've covered you for many years. I've gotten to know you. But tonight provides a unique opportunity for us to get to know who Eric Holder really is. Like so many Americans, your family story is an immigrant story. Both of your parents came from Barbados. You're double Bayesian. Let's take a look.
My father is born in Barbados, came to America through Ellis Island when he was 12 years old. My mother was born in Atlantic City, New Jersey. She was born of Bayesian parents as well.
Eric grew up as the older of two sons. His mother was a wonderful woman, and she doted upon her son.
We were raised by two parents who were very much aware of what was going on in America at the time, very much connected to the movement in terms of thinking and teaching us of how to interpret it and where we should stand.
I think that was one of the things that motivated Eric's father so much, to work hard and to make sure that his sons didn't have that sort of uncertain existence.
My father and mother would read the newspaper every day. And my brother picked up on that, and so he would start the newspaper at the back. He would start on the sports pages and read it forward and then read it backwards. He was chosen in 4th grade to go to a junior high school outside of our neighborhood in the gifted children's program. So at junior high school, he wound up being elected the student president, first black one at that school. Obviously, it was a big event in our house to have him go to college, do as well as he did.
I don't know anybody who is an alum of Columbia who loves the institution more than Eric.
Eric Holder talked about when he was a student. He took my course on the Civil War Reconstruction period. That class really emphasized the importance of slavery in shaping American development and bringing about the Civil War. He really learned a lot of what he knows about the history of race.
And in a lot of ways, I think he was shaped by, what was going on at the time with the Vietnam War, the protests, the burnings, the student takeovers. Eric sort of saw the injustice in the world, and I think that was ultimately what sort of led him to law school. You try to figure out whether or not, how are you going to be able to change the system? Are you going to change it from within? Are you going to change it from without? Or some combination thereof? And I think that Eric probably saw the law as the best avenue for being able to affect change.
So you emulated your father, reading the newspaper backwards and forwards. Tell us more about your parents.
My father was raised by his mom. His father abandoned him, and I think he was determined to make sure that his sons never felt that sense of uncertainty that he felt in his life. He didn't graduate from high school, and yet he is, I think, the wisest man I've ever known. My mom was a traditional mother who was always there for her sons, constantly pushing us to make sure that with regard to educational achievement, that was something that we focus on, because that was going to be the key to success.
Why don't you tell everybody what was extraordinary about your father joining the Army?
He was too old to be drafted, so he decided to enlist. And
he was almost 40.
Yeah, he was a master sergeant, and while in uniform, he was discriminated against, both in North Carolina and Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, he was told he couldn't get a sandwich at a lunch place, had to walk around the back, which was new to him, coming from the West Indies, having lived in New York. And yet that never shook his faith in this country. As an immigrant, that immigrant love for the new country was something that he always had, and that whole generation put up with so much so that people like me would have the opportunities that I had.
And did I read this right? It was your grandmother in Atlantic City. She was politically active in that she helped or was part of demonstrations to integrate the Woolworth lunch counters in Atlantic City.
Oh yeah, she was a firecracker. She was from Barbados, and one time we picked up the New York Times, and I said, hey, that looks like Grammy. And there she was, holding up a sign protesting to desegregate the lunch counters at Woolworth's in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And so people have to remember that, this whole question of segregation, discrimination was not only confined to the South.
So from the 4th grade on, you, like so many who went through integration, and so many like me who are children of the civil rights movement, you had to live in two worlds. You had to become bicultural. What was that like? Talk about that.
Yeah, I did lead that dual existence. I mean, I was certainly still a kid grounded in East Elmhurst, a lower middle class, predominantly black neighborhood. And then I was in another part of Queens where I went to school that was overwhelmingly Jewish and a little more upscale. And I had my feet in both worlds, which I think in some ways was and advantageous to me because it equipped me for the world that I was going to have to deal with as an adult. I never wanted to lose my roots, you know, and my sense of myself as primarily a black man, but at the same time I wanted to be able to figure out how to negotiate, you know, the majority society.
And you didn't lose your roots, because even though you were going to a predominantly white, predominantly Jewish school, you socialized at home. Most of your friends were from the Caribbean.
Yeah,
Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of people from the Caribbean, a few who had parents from the South, but you know, my ability to dance, my ability to, you know, and I can dance.
I've seen it, yes, he can.
My ability to focus on the appropriate music. Beatles were cool, but I was with the Temptations, the Supremes, Parliament Funkadelic. That was East Elmhurst. That's where I was.
And you also went to Stuyvesant, which is still, to this day, one of the most exclusive schools in the country, in New York City. You got some incredible score. What was it?
260 out of like 300. You get 300 questions, and I think I got about
That's right.
260 something or other of them right, you know.
And so you wanted to go to UCLA.
I wanted to go to UCLA. Kareem was there, you know. He has been my idol for as long as I think I've been alive. I followed him in high school, in college. And I figured, you know, I wanted to be out there with a man. And got into UCLA, but they didn't give me nearly as much money as Columbia did. And so I decided to stay in New York. And I remember my father said, now you got to think about this, son. Where would you rather spend your time in college? In Providence, Rhode Island, or New York City? And I thought about that for about a nanosecond and said, I'm going to Columbia.
Now, one of the professors you had was Eric Foner, one of the nation's most preeminent slave historians. What impact did he have on you?
Well, he at the time was talking about things that are more commonly accepted now. He talked about the impact of slavery on this country in terms of the economic base that it created for this nation, and how the North was dependent on slavery, and how the development of the United States was dependent on the maintenance of the slavery system in the South. And these are things that we had never heard of before. I think he was probably a minority voice at the time, but all those who have really studied the issue at this point really acknowledge that but for slavery, this nation would not have become the nation that it became. Certainly was, you know, if you look at slavery population, that was the single most valuable asset in the United States at the time. I'm not obviously saying that it was a good thing, but in pure economic terms, that's true.
In your senior year, you decide to apply to law school.
Yeah.
Now, did you really want to go to law school, or were you trying to delay the inevitable?
No, I described law school at that time as the haven for the undecided. I came out of college with a degree in American history, and I was thinking, all right, now what do I do here? And people told me there are so many things you can do with a legal degree. And I said, all right, that sounds good. I'll go there and find out what I can do with this degree in the law. But in first year, I had criminal law taught by Telford Taylor, who was a former Nuremberg prosecutor, and something clicked. You know, the notion of dealing with criminal law and being a litigator, it was, I guess, after my first year, towards the end of my first year, I decided, you know what, I think I really want to be a lawyer. That's what I want to do with a legal degree.
And then you also liked constitutional law.
Yep. Constitutional law was probably my favorite subject in law school, because you really understand, you get a sense of the history of the United States by the study of constitutional law, and especially the way in which the Supreme Court got it right, sometimes got it wrong too often, and through the study of the legal system and decisions made by various judges, and particularly the Supreme Court, you got a better understanding of how we got to be the country that we are. And
you had some great clerkships during that time.
That I did. I clerked after my second year, after my first year, actually, with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And after my second year, I came down to Washington, D.C., and I was a clerk here at the Justice Department in the criminal division.
It's interesting to see your life in hindsight, because those clerkships literally set the stage for your career and life in D.C., from the Department of Justice to becoming D.C. Superior Court judge and beyond. Let's take a look.
When Eric was judge, one of the things that I think permeated his tenure was this concept of fairness. Everybody really liked Eric and had a lot of respect for him. And I used to always think, I was like, how can prosecutors and defense attorneys like you, you know? But you learn that fairness isn't a zero-sum game.
I remember him talking about his experience when he was a Superior Court judge here in the District of Columbia. And he was required, because of the mandatory minimum sentencing in place, to sentence so many young African American men to literally decades in prison for drug crimes. And he saw the impact that that had not only on them, but on their families and on their communities.
The crack epidemic had hit the District of Columbia, and he cared obviously very much about the public safety of the citizens of the District of Columbia. There were conditions that were breeding crime, and he realized that just locking defendants up without appropriate treatment programs and chances for rehabilitation perhaps was not the answer.
I remember a particular case. There was a 12-year-old who was in gang activity and had shot and killed another very young person. I think it might have been another 12-year-old. And that case really, really moved him.
I chose Eric Holder because of his very distinguished career in the Justice Department with the Public Integrity Section, and his career as a Superior Court judge, the trial court judge here in the District of Columbia. He seemed to understand that this local responsibility, which by the way is the predominant responsibility for the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, was something he had to rethink and make sure fit.
He really, I think, transformed the way that office conducted business. Prior to Mr. Holder becoming U.S. Attorney, the office seemed somewhat detached from the community.
In the course of these oversight functions and committees, we have debated and disagreed, sometimes fiercely, on a number of issues, and today obviously is no exception.
The appointment of Janet Reno as the Attorney General was a sign of hopefulness. Eric Holder was her deputy AG and took responsibility for initially handling her criminal justice portfolio.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today on the important and troubling issue of hate crimes. As you know,
we, among other things, tried to advance the passage of the Hate Crimes Prevention Act, now known as the Matthew Shepard James Byrd Hate Crime Prevention Statute. And so we were able to work with Eric Holder, to work with Janet Reno, to try to advance those concerns. And for that reason, I think he deserves to be recognized as one of our greatest public servants.
One of our greatest public servants. The man who said that, Wade Henderson, is here in the audience, and public life has been your calling, and now you started with the Department of Justice in the Public Integrity Section.
The Public Integrity Section is a part of the criminal division that prosecutes official corruption cases, and so I had the opportunity to try cases all over the country, I guess as far west as Guam and as far east as, I guess, Philadelphia, Boston. Never tried a case, though, in Washington, D.C., interestingly enough.
And in the Public Integrity Section was that section that was the creation as a result of Watergate.
Yeah, it was created after Watergate because the Department of Justice at that time did not have a mechanism within headquarters to deal with public corruption cases, and then head of the criminal division, Richard Thornburg, who later became Attorney General, decided that there was a need for that. So I was the first honors grad to be a part of the Public Integrity Section.
And did you like that work at the time? Did you think that that's the work you wanted to be doing?
Oh, I loved it. My plan was to come, I took the New York bar because I was going back to New York, which was the center of the universe, and I was going to stay here for about 2 or 3 years, and I ended up spending 12 years at the Public Integrity Section, and I've never left DC.
Now, so after working at the Justice Department, as you said, for more than 12 years, you were then appointed by President Reagan to be DC's Superior Court judge, but you found that work to be interesting, to say the least, because of what was happening in Washington at the time. Talk about what it was like, one, being a judge. So how old were you? You were
37.
So young, but also at a time in Washington that was difficult, to say the least.
It was a time when D.C. was in the throes of the crack wars. People tend to forget that at that time Washington was considered the murder capital of the country. We had the highest per capita murder rate. And I had coming before me on a daily basis these just waves and waves of young black men who I had to send to prison. And it was something that just wore me down over the course of the 5 years that I was a judge. And so I ultimately decided to leave the bench.
Now, was it Thurgood Marshall who said that the D.C. Superior Court was one of the most powerful places you could be? Because it's Washington, D.C., you have jurisdiction over local things, but also federal matters.
Yeah, he was talking about the position of the U.S. Attorney. The U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C. is both the local prosecutor as well as the federal prosecutor. It's why it's the largest U.S. Attorney's office in the country. And given, where you sit in Washington, D.C., you can do things as complicated as, complex political corruption cases like the case of Dan Rostenkowski, in addition to doing, street crime, where you're dealing with misdemeanors. And as the U.S. Attorney, you have the ability to set policy. And that's one of the reasons why I was so grateful that Eleanor Holmes Norton gave me the opportunity to be U.S. Attorney and was supportive of the ideas that I had about shifting responsibilities and resources to the Superior Court side and taking people away from the even more draconian federal drug sentencing laws that we had at the time.
One of the wonderful things that happened to you while you were sitting on the bench was that you met Sharon. This is what she said once you met, and you asked for her number.
Oh, yeah.
And she said, well, you know what? I'm listed. I'm listed and my name's listed as S.D. Malone.
Right.
Call information and get my number. And if you can't remember my name between now and the time you get home, then don't bother.
And she did tell me that. And I still have the piece of paper, the invitation that I got. Well, I remember I got to the car and I wrote down S.D. Malone. And I called up and we spoke the next day.
By the time you met Sharon, you were sitting on the bench,
right?
Right? And you mentioned earlier that Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton is the one who put you forth to be U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. And then you were nominated by President Clinton and confirmed in 1993. And it was during that period you also became close with the late Ron Brown.
I did.
You considered him a friend and a mentor.
And a mentor. He's a guy who I owe a great deal to, who I miss on a daily basis. And one of the darkest days in my life as U.S. Attorney was the day of the plane crash.
Now, a year after Ron Brown's death, 1997, President Clinton nominated you or appointed you to be Deputy Attorney General of the United States under Attorney General Janet Reno.
Yeah.
You were confirmed 100-0. I mean, that's unheard. That would be unheard of today.
No, yeah, exactly. 100-0. No, that's virtually impossible. I mean, a non-contested confirmation vote now would be like 90-10. And you'd have to figure out, no, why did you vote? And people just reflex. They don't want to let people get 100-0 votes. But yeah, I got that as Deputy Attorney General.
And as Deputy Attorney General, again under Attorney General Janet Reno, you're basically running the department. What does that actually entail?
It was for me in some ways the most physically demanding job that I had, because you have responsibilities for policy, but you also are the person who's the interface between the Justice Department, other executive branch agencies, and all the U.S. attorneys, 94 U.S. attorneys around the country, all of whom, think that they have a presidential seal on their walls, and they all think they know better than anybody else. And so you're trying to navigate that, trying to make sure that the Attorney General has all the information. It's a really, really tough job. Because the reality is the Attorney General has the ability to say, in some nice way, well, I'm not going to do that. Let the Deputy Attorney General do it, And you're kind of like the Mikey of the Justice Department. And I left that job saying to myself, I will never again be the number 2 person in any organization that I'm a part of.
Now, you said Attorney General Janet Reno let you work on things that you were interested in. What were you interested in?
I was certainly interested. We started something called the Children Exposed to Violence Initiative, where you looked at all the studies that showed that kids who were exposed to violence, and not kids who were necessarily the victims of violence, but just exposed to violence, were less likely to finish school, more likely to become involved in the criminal justice system, and I think very interestingly, more likely to be re-victimized. And so we tried to focus on ways in which we could intervene in the lives of kids who had been exposed to violence so that they wouldn't follow into all those negative things.
Mm-hmm. And during that time, the nation was shocked by the murder of James Byrd in Texas, murdered by white supremacists. And then was about 5 or 6 months later, Matthew Shepard was left to die on a prairie fence in Wyoming. And that led to the push and a call for hate crimes legislation.
Yeah, and it was something that we worked, long and hard to make law, to come up with ways in which we could put on the federal books, give us the ability to deal with those kinds of crimes. And we were butting our heads against a wall in Congress. It took an awful long time. It didn't happen during the Clinton administration to get those bills passed.
2000 rolls around, and it's Vice President Al Gore versus then Texas Governor George W. Bush. You had maybe visions of serving in a higher capacity in a Gore administration, but as we all know, that did not happen. Al Gore went down to defeat. So you couldn't be Janet Reno's.
I'm not sure he actually went down to defeat, but for purposes of this conversation, we'll say
yes,
that. All right.
Yes, he did not become President of the United States, is what I mean. As a result of Al Gore not becoming President of the United States, you toyed with the idea of running for mayor of Washington.
I did.
First, why? And there's a part two.
Well, this is a city that I love. I thought that there were things that I could contribute given the relatively unique experiences that I had as a judge, as U.S. attorney. It seemed to me that the potential of the city was untapped. All of the potential of the city had been untapped. I'd made friends, relationships, especially as U.S. attorney, that I thought I might be able to convert into some good policy and be a force for effective change. I was really intrigued by that possibility.
There's one person you talked to in particular who killed the idea.
Yeah, my lovely wife, who said, I thought, interestingly, that she would vote for me and that she thought that I would be a good mayor, but she said that I would be serving as a single man.
And thus...
That pretty much ended.
So you didn't run for mayor. Sharon put a stop to it. You decided you wanted to stay married.
Yeah.
And so you went into the private sector. You joined the law firm of Covington and Burling.
Yep.
What did you work on when you were there?
Oh, a whole variety of things. It was my first experience in the private sector, and so I worked on commercial cases. I worked on international cases. It was a fascinating 8 years. I had really tried to avoid private practice, but Covington turned out to be a really good experience. It's one of the reasons why I went back to the firm after I left as AG.
But there was a shift in the country after 9/11. How did 9/11 impact you and your thinking going forward in terms of whether you wanted to stay in private practice or go back into government?
After 9/11 and after our government's reaction to 9/11, and especially with regard to the interrogation techniques that we employed, I began to speak out about those kinds of things, talked more about, I thought, the way in which the so-called war on terror was being prosecuted. I was also concerned about the way in which the war on drugs was being prosecuted. And I started to gravitate more again towards public issues, and thought to my mind, in my own mind, that if I had the opportunity to serve again, that might be something that I'd be interested in.
And in terms of waterboarding, when you spoke out about that, what was it about waterboarding that so offended you that you felt compelled to speak out?
Well, it's interesting. The first question I was asked in my confirmation hearing was waterboarding torture? And I said, yeah, it's obviously torture. We prosecuted people, the Japanese who did that to our prisoners in World War II. We tried to hold accountable people in the Vietnam War who did it to our prisoners. And the notion that our nation would then engage in an activity that we had condemned seemed to me to be antithetical to who we say we are as a nation.
As it turned out, the Al Gore not being president of the United States turned out to be a brief pause, because you would go on to be appointed the first African-American Attorney General of the United States under the historic presidency of Barack Obama. Yep, let's take a look.
When Obama chose to appoint Eric Holder as his Attorney General, we did not know at the time that he was really making a significant contribution to reshaping American history, and most especially the history of civil and human rights.
Not only is the Attorney General the President's lawyer, but he is the people's lawyer.
The day that he walked into the Justice Department, the staff in the RFK Main Justice Building erupted with applause. I mean, there were folks lining the hallways, the stairways, the balconies. It was a sense that Eric Holder had come home.
I want to begin by thanking Vice President Biden, a good friend.
I think Eric's role in race relations has been showing all Americans that a black American can handle a job. Color has nothing to do with your abilities.
In things racial, we have always been, and we, I believe, continue to be, in too many ways, essentially a nation of cowards.
The speech he gave to the employees of the Justice Department about the importance of Black history and its role in achieving justice in America.
He believed that real change, lasting change, began with confronting the hard truths that may have stood as barriers to advancing your goals.
We saw this in last year's election with countless attempts to suppress the vote of communities of color.
Minorities, those who will never have the political power to protect themselves fully through the political process. That, for me, is the most important thing the Justice Department can do.
The day the Shelby versus Holder case was decided, the case in which the Supreme Court struck down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act, Eric Holder convened a number of civil rights leaders in his office.
Using his lawyers aggressively in the Civil Rights Division to defend voting rights, I made a powerful statement. You know, Eric understood that voting is the language of democracy. You know, if you don't vote, you don't count.
My father acted as someone who wasn't afraid to be an agitator. My dad has really impressed upon me that you should always do the right thing.
No justice, no peace. Protesters of different ages and races demanding answers in the shooting death of 18-year-old Michael Brown at the hands of a policeman.
One of the things that is seared into my memory is when he went on behalf of the president to Ferguson after Michael Brown was killed.
Holder arrived in St. Louis this morning. He met with students, community leaders, and
to watch him sit down with grieving mothers and family members, to watch him put his arms around them and embrace them. His full impact on Ferguson may never be properly written, but it is written in the hearts of probably everybody that lives there. He will live in so many African American men for generations yet to come. And his impact will have a tremendous effect on generations yet unborn.
I mean, we have a lot to get to. That video and seeing your reaction speaks volumes about your tenure, just the reaction from the audience, how the public sees your tenure, but also how you feel about your own tenure. And you would not have been in that position if you had not been introduced to one then Senator Barack Obama from Illinois. And you met him at a dinner party in 2004?
It was after he had been elected to the Senate, but before he'd actually been sworn in as a senator.
And so you meet him. What did you think?
Well, you know, it was interesting. I mean, we immediately kind of hit it off talking about sports. He has this, misimpression that Chicago sports teams are better than New York sports teams. So there was a bit of friction in addition to that affinity. But we also started talking about the kinds of things that he had been doing in Chicago, the things I had done as Deputy Attorney General and my time in the Justice Department. And we talked especially about criminal justice reform and some of the interesting things that he had done as a state senator. And it was the kind of thing where you just kind of have a feel for somebody, that you kind of like them, and beyond liking, you know that they have they share a worldview with you. I went to his office on a couple of occasions after he was sworn in, and we talked about, what could we possibly do with the federal criminal justice system and the criminal justice system writ large. And I think that was kind of the initial glue that held us together.
Did you think then that, wow, not only do I like this guy, he's interesting, but he's going to be president?
No, I can't honestly say that I thought he was going to be president. You could see that he was going to go places, maybe be a force, in the Senate, a force in Washington. He was impressive, he was engaging, and he's still all of these things. He's funny, and he was just a person who I liked and who I respected and who I thought had an awful lot to offer.
So then he decided to run for president, and you decide you're going to help him. Yeah. And you, along with Valerie Jarrett and now the First Lady, there in Iowa campaigning for him.
Yeah, I remember he called me to ask me to be a part of the campaign, and I cut him off midway, through the conversation and said, I'm in. And I thought that, this was going to be an idealistic quest that we were going to be involved in. I wasn't at all certain that we were going to win, but I remember after that first trip to Iowa and coming back and telling Valerie, there's something going on here. I thought all about, my dad, the stuff he went through in World War II, discriminated against while in uniform. I thought about my grandmother and the protests that she was involved in, and about all the folks who made my career possible. And it just seemed to me that was something that I wanted to be a part of. And I've never regretted it.
Then Senator Obama becomes President-elect Barack Obama from the state of Illinois. Did you think you wanted to work in the administration?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to work in the administration, and the question was, where I was going to work in the administration.
I mean, was there any question that you would be tapped to be Attorney General of the United States?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, there were other possibilities discussed, among them, positions within...
Such as?
Positions within the White House.
Such as?
White House counsel. And the question was, where could I serve the president best? And there was at least one school of thought that thought, we want to keep you here in the White House and close to the president. I thought that given my experiences at the Justice Department and how important the Justice Department was and how critical the Justice Department was to this whole notion of criminal justice reform, among other things, that I could best serve the president there.
What did you view as your priorities coming back into the building as Attorney General, the first African-American Attorney General of the
first
United
thing
States?
was to reestablish the morale and sense of direction within the Justice Department. The place had been, and especially the Civil Rights Division, had really been decimated in a whole bunch of ways, both in terms of resources dedicated to the Civil Rights Division and the way in which the career people in the Civil Rights Division had been treated. And same thing was true in the Environmental and Natural Resources Division, to a lesser extent, Antitrust Division. And so the first thing was to build up morale and give people a sense of purpose. And then from there to focus on the things that I thought were important. We had national security responsibilities, but I said, you know what? The Justice Department has responsibilities for a whole group of other things, the things that I call the more traditional parts of the department. And I said, I'm not only going to be a national security attorney general, I'm also going to be focusing on these other things: criminal justice reform, antitrust enforcement, environmental protection. All those kinds of things were going to get equal weight.
Now you are Attorney General of the United States. Now you are back in government and you have all the access to all the information that comes with that job. How did your view on waterboarding, on the Patriot Act, on the so-called war on terror, national security, how did your views in those areas change as a result of now being the top law enforcement official in the country?
I don't think they necessarily did change. One of the first things that we did in the Obama administration was to rescind those Office of Legal Counsel opinions that served as the underpinning for those enhanced interrogation techniques, which were inconsistent with, again, who we say we are as a people. And we came up with a way in which you looked at the Army Field Manual and said, if this is in terms of interrogating prisoners, we're going to do so in a way that stands up to the ideals that we have as a nation. So, my views didn't necessarily change. I was critical of the prior administration when it came to how certain parts of the war were prosecuted, and this has been publicly reported. I ordered an investigation into some of the techniques that had been used and some of the people who had employed those techniques.
In that time, the political environment became increasingly more difficult, not only since the time you were there, right, but before, but when there as Attorney General. How difficult was it to do your job in that pressure cooker isn't even the right word, just an environment of hostility? That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah. It was an interesting thing because there was a lot that I thought we could accomplish if we'd had just kind of the normal give and take. There's always going to be friction between Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, and liberals, but there were a lot of positions that were taken by the other side that I thought were unprincipled and kind of unnecessary, that were designed to not give any successes to this president, to this administration, perhaps to this attorney general. And so it became a difficult thing. And so the question then became, how do you navigate that? And you looked for allies on the other side in a way that you didn't have to do in the past. But also you had to rely on executive power that we had. The president did, I did as well, identifying where we wanted to go, seeking legislative solutions to the extent that was possible, and if that failed, to see how we might use our executive power.
And one of the things that happened was that you were found in contempt of Congress,
right,
as a result of Fast and Furious, which I take you don't take too kindly.
No, I don't take too kindly. On the other hand, I think it says an awful lot more about the people who voted to do it than it does about my conduct. That's in all other administrations where you had these, and we're fighting over documents here. This wasn't a question of the merits of Fast and Furious. The contempt thing is all about whether or not we're going to give them certain documents. There were always ways in which that was negotiated. I was involved in that when it came to the independent counsel controversies during the Clinton administration. We always worked out ways in which it could be done. But the folks on the other side, and a particular group on the other side, decided in conjunction with the gun lobby that they wanted to make an example of this attorney general. And so they did what they did. You know what? I woke up the next day, the day after that contempt vote, and I was still Attorney General of the United States.
And have you seen Chairman Issa since you've gone into private practice?
No, I've not seen him. People always told me as I was going up there to testify, Ron White, who's the Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legislative Affairs, would say, Eric, go to your good place. Go to your good place. And he said, because I told him, he said, what's your good place? I said, beach on Barbados. He said, go to that good place to try to calm me down, because I'm not wired in the way that I might have seen in those hearings, being kind of stoic and accepting all this criticism. My natural inclination, I'm Sonny Holder's kid, and my natural inclination is, you hit me, I hit you back, and so it was a hard thing to stay in that good place, but I didn't want to lower myself or somehow seem undignified as Attorney General of the United States. I was going to leave that to them.
I can't let you go without talking about a couple of things. One, it was the vacating of key provisions of the Voting Rights Act that basically gutted it, and now we've seen a proliferation of voter ID laws around the country. Would love to get your view on that and what you think the prospects are of repairing the VRA.
I think that the Shelby County decision is one of the worst decisions the Supreme Court has issued in the last 50 years. It reflects a naivete or an ideological perspective that I think is really kind of breathtaking. It's just an awful decision.
And the day after the Shelby v. Holder decision came the Supreme Court's decision in U.S. versus Windsor. That was the case that vacated the so-called Defense of Marriage Act. Why did you think it was important for you as Attorney General, for President Obama as President of the United States, to make that determination?
I ultimately decided that given that legislative history, given the way in which gay and lesbian people in this country had been discriminated against, that I was not going to have my Justice Department be on the wrong side of history. And I remember telling the president that, and because I didn't want him to read about it in the newspapers, and he said that he agreed with us taking that position. And then we saw, sometime thereafter, that a very conservative Supreme Court agreed with us.
In the video montage that we saw earlier, there's a terrific picture in there of you in Ferguson. You were meeting with community members, and there's a woman who is leaning on you. She's leaning on you. And you are perfectly comfortable. You're still clearly in that picture talking to the other people who are there to meet with you. Why was it important for you as Attorney General or as an African American man to go there, to be in Ferguson at that time?
We made the determination, which was a pretty risky thing at the time, that I should go out there. We were putting the prestige of my prestige at risk, the prestige of the president and the administration, to see if my presence and my interaction with people there might have a calming effect, at least a short-term calming effect. And what I did was to go and to tell people, look, I'm the Attorney General of the United States, but I'm also a black man. And I understand what it is you are talking about, having had some negative experiences myself with people in law enforcement, with the criminal justice system. And I can assure you that I will bring that perspective, the department will bring that perspective as we look at the issues here in Ferguson.
We also saw in that earlier clip the famous Nation of Cowards speech.
Yeah.
Here we are. How many years ago was that now?
That was 2009. It was Black History Month, 2009.
Right.
I think it might have been my first address as Attorney General.
Yes, and I remember the reaction to that speech. Feel vindicated?
Yeah, I mean, if you read the entirety of the speech, everybody says, Nation of Cowards, as if that was as if I came out and said, Nation of Cowards, thank you very much. It is a speech that I think really has stood up pretty well. And what I was trying to convey was that we are a nation that is, and I said it in the speech, we are expert at avoiding the discussion of racial issues. And it's understandable because it's a painful part of our past. And we're uncertain, if you're white, black, whatever, as to how we interact with one another around issues of race. And it was really a call to say, look, we have to get beyond that. If we want to get to the place where we need to be, we first have to have an ability to talk about these issues, and then we have to come up with concrete action. So I'd urge everybody, actually read the whole speech. I wouldn't change a word. I wouldn't change a word. It was, I got a lot of criticism for using that phrase, and others might have used a different phrase, but what I was trying to say was, this nation just doesn't confront its racial past in the way that it should.
So, as you know, at the History Makers, we like to end the interviews, we always end the interviews with a legacy question. So I want to ask you what you want your legacy to be. And when you think about that, talk about it from the perspective of a child of immigrants who's been able to reach such incredible heights to become the top law enforcement legal official in the United States.
Well, I'd like people to think of me as a person who believed in this country, always have, always will, believed in the ability of this country to do the right thing. I'd like to think, I hope people will think of me as an advocate for people who too frequently were voiceless. As a man who tried to change institutions in our country that needed reform, and as a man who left this country more fair and more just.
Here to provide tribute to you is one of your favorite Motown artists, Kim.
Yep.
In a tribute performance of A Beautiful World, because that is what you are committed to, making it a beautiful world for all of us. Thank you for a great interview.
Thank you.
Lawyer, public servant, leader in the cause of social justice and equality. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for the Honorable Eric Holder as the artist Kim performs.
Another round of applause for Eric Holder.
Whatever will be, it will be. Won't let the weight of this world bury me. We all want our place in the sun. Come whatever what may, it is done. Will you walk out on water? Will you breathe on heaven's door? Will you leave a path to follow, a beautiful world? A beautiful world, yeah. Hey. You come suffer with me. I'm your friend. There's a river of love at your hands. All right. Take your troubles and hurry to the sea. Cast your care on the love and be free. Yeah, yeah. Will you walk out on water? Will you breathe on heaven's door? Will you lead a path to follow, or will you lead a path to war? Only faith can ease your burden. Only love can heal the hurt. Let your peace fall on the earth. A beautiful world.
Come on, put your hands together, y'all.
It's a beautiful world. Ooh, yeah. 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 It's a beautiful world. Hey, hey. All right, come on. Hey, it's a beautiful world. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Will you walk out on water? Will you breathe on heaven's door? Will you lead a path to follow? Or will you lead a path to war? Only faith can ease your burden. Only love can heal the hurt. Let your peace fall on the earth. A beautiful world.
It takes extraordinary people doing extraordinary things to make this world we live in a much more beautiful place. We thank you for your service.
Mr. Attorney General, thank you so much. Tonight has been truly incredible. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Eric Holder.
For more information or to order your own copy of An Evening with Eric Holder, please visit thehistorymakers.org or call 866-914-1900. That's 866-914-1900. The preceding program was funded in part by Toyota, AT&T, Baldwin Richardson Foods, Lincoln Financial Group, Apple, American Airlines. A complete list is available at thehistorymakers.org.